Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, regardless of where you are in the world today. It's always amazing that we can all come together in one place at one time and have amazing conversation. So I'm super excited this week for those of you that come regularly to see and hear us here on Blue TV, which is every Wednesday at 11 a.m. Eastern, 10 a.m. Central. You recognize that many times I have these solo events where it's really just me and we're talking about all things LinkedIn. This week, and randomly, not randomly, there is usually strategy, but we will have every now and then, we'll have some amazing guests here as well. We are super excited here to have Robert Yeager. So I'm excited to allow him to introduce himself because I most certainly would not do him very much justice. So Robert, if you don't mind, if you could first introduce yourself and then we'll come back to me for a second.
Yeah, certainly. So Robert Yeager, actually I work as a quality systems manager. I have been working within the same company for about 10 years now, so leader within the organization. Have a lot of controlling and accounting background, plus also I would say 9 years of project management experience. Part of LinkedIn, my experience on LinkedIn. Actually, I have done about 5 years of posting. It's more along the lines of me sharing information with others, helps me learn, but then also gets me connected to other people. More of a servant leadership kind of style, things like that. So just a little bit about me.
I love that. That last line resonates with me because we talked about this a little bit earlier before the show went live, but I always say lead by serving. So I love that. And I also think that project management resonates with me as well. And I think when we dive a bit further into the conversation, those out in the audience will also understand how much project management probably resonates with all of us as we're all doing some sort of project management in our daily work. But before we dive a bit further into the conversation, I do want to take a few moments to first welcome everyone out there. Gino's already out. He says, welcome. He's from the wet and cooler Huntsville. Yes. So he's in Huntsville, Alabama, which is where my mother is at. And happy Thanksgiving, he says. Thank you. Happy Thanksgiving to you, Gino. And I did not make it back to Huntsville for Thanksgiving this week. As everyone can tell, I'm in my home office here in Houston, Texas. So we're super excited that Gino is out there from Huntsville. I'm from Houston. Where are you located, Robert?
I live in Akron, Ohio.
Yes. In Akron, yes. Oh, it's really cool. I was just
it's windy. It's kind of ugly outside, and this is the beginning of winter, essentially. So, yeah, no fun.
Yeah. Well, I know Huntsville's usually about 10 to 15 degrees cooler right than I am here. And right now we're at 58, which is pretty doggone cool considering we had, I think yesterday was 79. And right now we're at 70, right now we're at 57. So that's pretty huge difference. Anyway, so again, I'm super excited to have you here. I know most of the time we talk about, especially when there's solo events, we talk a lot about how to elevate your game here on LinkedIn. You will still get that type of information here as well, because I think you'll find as we go down further in the conversation that even LinkedIn really is like a project that we have to manage. But I'd rather spend a little bit of time really just getting to know Robert and some of his experience before we really dive into how does that apply to LinkedIn. So just as a reminder, though, we're here every week at 10 a.m. Central, 11 a.m. Eastern. Our sponsors are all things marketing related, Market Me More. Specifically, if you're looking for LinkedIn Live, podcast, conferences where you're actually live, that type of support, and anything related to those activities, Market Me More is your go-to person. All things related to sales, so consulting, fractional leadership, coaching, that training, Cellivators is your go-to. And if you're looking for someone to make an impact or to help be an impact in your organization, or you think you as well can make an impact, go to Top Voices Unite, all things related to impactful leaders. So I want to thank those sponsors today for continuously supporting us. Those of you out there that are regular attendees, some that always engage and others that don't, we want to thank you guys for being out here as well. Welcome, Melanie. She is from the Philippines. So thank you, Melanie, for being out there as well. I'd like to now kind of shift a little bit of the focus really on Robert. And Robert, I know you really talked about QA and project management. I know you've got a lot going on. So maybe tell us, you and I are somewhat close to the same age, but tell me a little bit about your journey. Like how'd you get where you are now? Where did it all start? Did you always know?
So
Were you a project manager from the get-go?
actually, no. So I've had a really interesting path. Um, Quick overview, and I actually started in restaurant management
Oh,
right out of school. Did sales for about 5 years. Mid into my life, I went back to school to get my bachelor's and then my master's, and then I entered into manufacturing overall into 2013. Was with the company for about 2 years, and then took a jump to the current company that I'm in. Project management. Actually, it's advice from my dad. My dad always told me to um, take free training and get yourself in front of people. Project management was really a great way to do that. So one of the first projects was more of a program that I ran. So had to deal with intercompany pricing. And it was, there was a lot of people that were involved, things like this, right? Higher level executives. So people that are very busy, right? And project needed to be done, but it's really difficult for them to take the time to lead the project. And I'm like, I'm new in the company, been there for about 4 months. It's like, ooh, me, I'll lead the project. They said, no, you can't lead it by yourself. So they, connected me to, another controlling person. And that's kind of where I sat, was accounting controlling within the organization. But that really, helped me into project management, right? And I, ran that, and it was more of a program. So there were about 4 projects that kind of sat behind that. But then after that, I actually did, more formal training within project management. I had a 2-day training, very good project management training within the company that I worked for. Also did some agile project management training. I never did set for PMP, but I enjoyed the collaboration that you had with people, right? And it really got my name out there. It makes you visible, but it's more of the order. So analysts like order. They like to control things, put things, and stuff like this. A lot of it kind of put me into that. It satiated me. Like the idea of, here's a plan, let's execute the plan. How do we do this? And then how does this make a difference within the organization? So, and over, I don't know, 9 years, I've probably run over 20 projects. I'm sure that I've been involved in a lot more than that as a team member. Not everybody likes to run them, so I found that it's easy to volunteer. But it really does get you a lot of visibility and things like that. But it doesn't just help you with your, I would say, professional within that, but it helps personally as well. So, but that kind of took that path. It's kind of a quick overview, as I know we're time limited, but just kind of those types of things give a lot of people advice. So things like that.
yeah, no. So I think that's an interesting journey. It's when I graduated with a fashion merchandising degree, but fashion
Sure,
merchandising and music education. So then I started out in retail sales. Then I went in and I waited tables a lot in
sure.
my earlier years in the restaurant space. And then I went directly into sales but I've been in, you know, uniform sales. I've been in telecom sales. I spent the majority of it in software, but I do believe that our varied background most certainly does help us as we forge our paths and as we start to really build our toolbox that really creates our experience that allows us to be experts in the space, we can take all those little bits of things that we learned along the way and apply them to what we're doing today. So maybe if you think about project management, I'd love to see what your response is in this. If you think about project management and what you do today, what do you think you learned in sales? Because I think most of us would not believe that sales is project management either. And I do believe it is kind of project management when you're having to navigate,
Sure.
but I'd love to know what you learned from sales, or what do you think you picked up from that experience that you've applied, if anything?
Yeah. So, I mean, from a sales perspective, especially when you're leading a project, right, as a project manager, um, planning, I mean, I've done a ton of cold calling within the sales, did financial sales. So, I mean, you're calling people. I knocked on doors for sales. So, you know,
Yes.
you build a thick skin, right?
I love that.
Um,
Yes.
when you're leading a project, nothing goes according to plan all the time, right? So important pieces of I don't know, prospecting, right? I've got my prospect list. How do I set this up? What are my requirements back? How many people do I have to call? So you're doing a lot of planning as you're prospecting or as you're coming through. You also, I have a milestone report out, right? So if I'm doing a project, there's certain times within that project that I have to report out to a steering committee. So you get a lot of questions that sit back. So think of it like you're selling to a prospect, right? I'm selling this life insurance. Why should you buy this? Versus what questions are you asking me? So it gives you that ability when you're setting in front of, and generally when you're running a project and it's high visibility, you're in front of executives sometimes, right? So you have to be able to think quickly on your feet, right? But you also have to be really well prepared. So if I'm in sales, I know that I'm going to get objections of why somebody should buy a product or things like this, right? But we know that successful salespeople have those rebuttals in their back pocket. Well, same thing with project management, right? So while you're not running all of the, work packages, you better know those work packages and have that, defense. So if somebody says, hey, why are you 2 weeks behind schedule? Or why are you 4 weeks behind schedule? How are you going to do this? You need to have the answers to all the questions that you think might be asked, right? Because you might not be asked these questions, but you do need to be prepared. So I think working within sales really gave me that background to understand, what to expect, because you've been in sales for, decades, right? So you hear everything, right? So you're prepared for everything. So I think that really, helps out within the project management space as well.
Well, and I think that's interesting because I do believe that, again, I'll go back to this concept of I do believe that anytime we are in a space, we're doing something, we are going to learn something that will enable us to be better as we go down our journey. And I don't know that it necessarily had to be in relation to sales. I just found that interesting because you had a little bit of a sales background, right? But it
Sure.
doesn't matter whether it's sales or it's maybe you started out as an accountant. None of that really matters what profession. But I think the takeaway from that is really that we can always learn something. But I love some of the things that you pointed out because they aren't just things that you can learn from sales. They're just things in general. So what I hear from a project management perspective, and you tell me if I'm wrong, is
Yep.
I heard you got to have thick skin because things aren't going to go the way you had intended a lot of the times, right?
Right. Absolutely.
I think what I also heard was that you have to be prepared and ready because just much like we will reference the sales, because that was the example you gave, right? Which was much like sales. You've got to know if, what potential objections might occur, right?
Sure.
But I
Yeah.
also think you said something about, because there's high visibility. You did not say this loud and clear, but to me, it's really being able to communicate effectively, right? In a
Yes.
way, and
Absolutely.
understanding who your audience is. Because I would suspect, and you tell me if I'm wrong, and I'd love for you to
Sure.
kind of lead the conversation. This would be the segue to pass it on over to you. But I feel like when you're talking about project management and knowing your audience, you're having to present to the upper level executives, the board advisors, whomever that might be, right? But you also have to deal with your constituents or those that maybe are below you in rank. I hate to use the term rank, but you get where I'm headed, right?
Sure.
Your audience is going to vary. What do you think when you think about your audience? What do you think was probably the hardest thing to overcome in understanding that you've got to position yourself differently for each of those conversations?
I would say, doing this for 9 years, right, and working with steering committees and things like that, and myself, right, leading, leadership positions, things like that. You have to understand what each audience needs, right? How am I going to effectively communicate this? Because an executive might really only have 40 minutes. So when I did, because I did project management training as well for our organization. And one of those things is that, okay, if I've got a project, I know it's going to last a year, I'm going to go out and I'm going to schedule all of my milestone meetings up front because I need to get on, the executive's calendar, right? But then when I talk about that, then event, I would get into the details, right? But the executives are there, as we talked about servant leadership. You have to be there to remove roadblocks, right? A steering committee is there so that hey, these are my blockers. This is why I'm doing this. So you're telling them the highlights. You're telling them that these are the things that I said I was going to do that I did. And these are the things that I can't get done because, X, Y, and Z is blocking me, right? But then as a project manager, and I think that this is what makes it more difficult for project managers, is there could be people that are at your level. There could be managers that sit on the project team, and most likely none of them report to you. Okay. So, especially in a large organization or even a smaller organization, if you're leading that project, you have to. Another thing I pulled in for my sales is a WIFM. So, what's in it for me, right? You have to be able to sell that project to those project team members. And that's important too, right? When you're choosing your team, you need to, bring people that have a stake within the project that you're doing, because that communication style, then you're going to take time out of their regular job, right? Most of the time when you're working on a project, like you said, unless you're, owning your own business, things like this, most of the time you're going to take time away from their daily work. And it's going to feel like they're doing something extra. So you need to be able to show them what that benefit is in order to meet with them on a weekly basis. So when you're structuring your work packages or, you're doing your things, you really have to pull in the people that are affecting that. And that's really helpful when you're building your project team so that you're pulling in the right people. But also, most of the times you have a project, you've got a sponsor. When you're pulling in the steering committee as well, they also have to have a stake involved as well, because they're not going to want to spend an hour out of their time, because everybody wants their time, right? That they need to know, okay, this is going to make my life easier because this is going to fix this problem that's out there and it's going to build some efficiencies. So, but knowing that, I would say having a communication agreement in place with your project team and then with your steering committee is really important for that effective communication so that they know what to expect moving forward.
So what I think, I heard a lot, so I'm going to only
Sure.
probably
No,
attack a portion of that, right?
Yep.
But I think in relation to what some of the challenges or what you learned is that you've really got to make sure that you understand what each audience member, what's in it for them, like what's the value that they're getting out of this, and that will drive how you engage with them, how you report back to them, right? It's almost like I always say, meet people where they are, understand what's driving them, right? If you aren't, I always say this, even in relation to some of the consulting opportunities that I've been engaged with, right? I have to understand what's the end game that they want to get to. And then what is considered noise? What do they understand? Like I've worked with someone who really, they didn't have a clue around sales. They just knew that they had to sell something, right? And they understood they had a great product, but they didn't really know how to create messaging or go forward. They didn't care about all the other noise. They just needed to know how to get to revenue as fast as possible. So I had to understand, okay, if this is where they are, these are the areas that they're not going to be good at. These are the areas that they're not going to really understand. I'm going to have to take more of that and just update them rather than asking for their permission or getting them to help build it, because they don't care about all of that, right? It's really just understanding what each person, what drives each person, and then thereby then communicating with them effectively. But I heard a couple of other things, Robert. Like I heard you say something around really making sure that you that you got people who were involved, that you understood before you even got them involved, because you don't know what their drivers are necessarily. They have to have, you may not know them well enough yet and you're in the middle of the project, but you have to know what's in it for them even before. Like, what's the value that they would potentially get out of this? So you've got to understand when you pick your team. For those of us who are solopreneurs, or maybe we're small business owners and we're looking for partners, right? It's really about finding people who, what's in it for them at the end of this. You may not know yet, but when you're seeking out your team, you, even if you're in an enterprise and you're looking for your team of advisors, or you're looking for a project, it's understanding who might be the key people. They've got to be diverse. They've got to bring different perspectives, and you've got to know before you even start to seek them out what potentially could be the end game for them. What could be the driver for them potentially. Most certainly got to qualify that, but it is really about thinking thoughtfully and purposefully when you're selecting your team. Fair?
Yes, absolutely. Because I mean, if you don't do that, that can block your whole project, right? If you put somebody on your team that is just like, no, this is bad, we don't, I mean, it'll drag down the entire project. So it's really important to think that stuff out prior to, setting that up and selecting your team members.
So have you selected anyone before that became a huge blocker?
I have been on teams that has happened, that people are very like, well, this isn't going to work, right? Very, very not optimistic. I would say they kind of are the devil's advocate, but then just continue to put a thorn in the side and very slow and stuff like this. So they're a stopper, right?
Yeah.
And I think in that instance, if you're leading the project, then it's important to say, hey, I appreciate differing opinion, but they don't want to do this. So I've heard, and I haven't been in these projects, but I've heard that there are, I've talked about project management to other people, and I've heard that there are people that will intentionally put people in that will, create subterfuge, right, within the project, because they don't want the project to go forward. I mean, these are some of those things that, if you're a leader, to kind of make sure that those types of things aren't happening, right? Because there can be disagreements, but at the end of the day, we want to make things better for everyone. So it's really important as a leader, if you're a sponsor or something like that, right, that you sense that that's happening. You should really be on the lookout for those types of things too.
Yeah, so I'd say I think I usually have pretty good intuition, but even I have made mistakes where I brought someone into a project that I thought would be valuable, or at least had such good differing opinions that would challenge us. But in the end, they did become big blockers. I guess, the challenge then is how do you solve to someone who's blocking, right?
Sure.
Because you can pull them aside, like you mentioned, and say, hey, look, I get we're not going to agree. How do we solve to that? But a lot of times those types of blockers are not easy to work with and don't really believe in compromise either, right?
Yeah.
I guess, how do you solve to something like that?
So I mean, yeah, in that instance, say you are right. I mean, and I haven't encountered a situation that's that bad, but maybe say that their schedule isn't aligning with yours, or they're not participating, right? So the key is that you always first want to go to that person and say, hey, what's going on? The expectation is this. You're supposed to be doing, this work project, but you always want to go to that person directly, and not immediately go to their supervisor. Or maybe you're working with a company, right, and you've got somebody that's outside, and you say, hey, I've got this programmer that I'm working with, but you always want to go to that person directly first to not burn bridges, right? And
Yeah.
maybe there really is something going on, and they're not intentionally doing it, but maybe they don't have the resources, or maybe they don't realize that they're being a blocker, right? So I think that directly going to that. And if that doesn't work, then escalating, right? And going to that person. So you always want to be able to go through that chain of command to say, okay, I'm going to the person first, and then I'm going to that person. So then maybe they thought they had the time and they didn't, and they need to replace them. Where I've seen that before, right? Where you have, maybe a person that's on a team that was put for a project, and maybe something else came up, right? So they had to
Yeah.
replace them. Could be the same thing with an outside vendor, right? So if I have a project team and I'm, maybe implementing a new, I don't know, IT program, right? To do something with that, and they give you, this employee, but maybe that employee is not engaged because something happened within their family, or that type of thing. Maybe they're just disconnected, and it's not a good time for them. And then that company can, send somebody else, but don't wait. You don't want things to linger. It's okay to not you know, call things out, be direct, but be honest about it, so that but you're not going to hurt anyone's feelings that way. As long as you're honest, as long as you're upfront, you're talking to them, and your project will move quicker, faster. Don't try to be polite, because it's not actually, helping you or that other person. Does that make sense?
It does. And I would also just add that I go back to this concept of really understanding, much like you mentioned at the beginning, what their driver is.
Hmm.
And what you also have to look at them as individuals and meet them where they are. Like, for example, I've got an individual who it just doesn't matter what we say, it's information is going to be leaked, even if you tell them not to, right? And
Right.
that is, of course, a huge problem. But what I've
Yes.
understood is the reason why that individual does that, right? He needs to feel like he's important. He needs to feel like
Sure.
he's in the know, right? So you kind of understand what's driving him, right? And then you have to you have to figure out the solution accordingly. So I do think it is important. And to really understand, what's driving them, and then meeting them where they are too, as well. But I believe you have to have good communication. 100%.
Absolutely. Yes. No, communication 100%. I totally agree with you.
And that's where that thick skin comes in, being able to really know first off that what you're going to say is hard. So you might get retaliation, you might get comments or have conversations that you would normally not like to have, but having thick skin will enable you to navigate whatever is hit or thrown your way. Wouldn't you agree?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And just, I mean, to reframe the thick skin, right? It's not about taking the abuse. It's about remembering that
Yeah,
generally when people are mad, right, it's not about you. It's about their
right,
situation, right? And trying to
correct.
go back through and say, don't take it personally. I mean, I know it's cliche, but most of the time when people are mad, they're not mad at you. They're mad at something else that's going on, or they're mad at the situation. Um, so to try and keep that in mind, if you notice yourself becoming emotional, step back, right? And make sure that you're handling those things the right way. A lot of times, within leadership training, they're like, attack the situation, never attack the person. Always look at the things that are in front of them. So you always want to make sure that, hey, this is what you signed up for, this is not happening, so they don't feel attacked. It's really, a much better situation when you walk into it.
I say sometimes things like, I know you're not going to want to hear this, but I've just got to be honest. And sometimes when you disarm them a little, like you prepare them, it makes it a little bit easier for them to digest what you say, right? It is how you approach it. So just being
Absolutely.
thoughtful and purposeful before you go engage in that conversation, because we as individuals, as project leaders, as owners of businesses, we as well have to take the personal out, right? We have to
Yeah.
remember that it's not personal for us either. Now I will say that we sometimes mix professional and personal, and really when we do that, we are really more in alignment with ourselves, but we can't take things personally, right? We've got to
Right.
recognize
Exactly.
that this is professional and business, and it has really, again, nothing to do with you, like you mentioned. So
But you talked about the part, but I want to kind of what I have found throughout my years and things like that is that when you empathize with a person, but you talk to them as like we talked about music, right?
yeah,
Before we went on that. So I mean, if you get that information, it disarms that person as well, so that if you do have to have a conversation later, you have something to pull on, because then they're more open to that, because and it has to be genuine, right, as well. Don't fake it, but
yeah.
genuinely be interested in the person, things like this. Then those conversations also are much easier.
Yeah, so you are just speaking my language there,
Yeah.
Robert. I think probably the most important aspect of all of our conversation right now is about listening, hearing, building relationships with those that you're
Yep,
working with, right? When you get to
absolutely.
know them from a personal perspective, you understand more about what's driving them. You understand a little bit more about their personality. You find commonality. It makes it easier to have those hard conversations. I mean, that's
Yeah,
the thing that I think we miss the most these days. I don't, I say it all the time in sales, but I think you put sales aside, it's just in everyday life. It seems like we have a
yeah,
really hard time resonating or aligning with someone because we don't take the time to get to know them. But if we can take a step back and understand who we're speaking to by understanding them as individuals, makes all the difference in the world in how we foster that relationship personally, but more importantly, for professionally.
yeah, absolutely, totally agree.
Okay, so what does all this mean to LinkedIn, right? Most of these people come here and they are here really to understand how do they elevate their game here on LinkedIn. But I know you and I talked about this before the show. It is really important that everyone understands that, just like you can call it, if you want to refer to LinkedIn as a sales funnel, you can, from a sales terminology, you can refer it as a project management. You can think of it in terms of social. It doesn't really matter, but it is really, in essence, regardless of what you define it at, it is really a project. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
I was going to say, and I feel like if you look at, I mean, there's a lot to do with LinkedIn, right? And there are different aspects of it. But if you think about all the things you mentioned, right? You've got to be able to know your audience
hmm
to make sure that your content resonates. You also have to choose which, for that audience, which one's the audience that you really need to align the most with so that your content really speaks more to them. And you also have to know that, you're going to start to engage in conversations, you're going to build partnerships, collaboration opportunities, and
yeah,
it's not always going to be as peachy as you'd like, that you're going to have to learn how to navigate those a bit differently. Wouldn't you agree?
yeah, absolutely. And I think looking from a LinkedIn perspective, right? And I mean, if anybody scrolls through their feed, looks at things like that, um, you I look at some content creators, right, and they have a very specific purpose, but the ones that are successful have a plan that sits behind it, right? So, and a plan starts with a strategy. But I mean, it's a similar thing. Projects flow from strategy, but strategy and projects help execution. I had training, as I said, early in my career, and planning is really one of the most important, if not the most important portions of your project. However, there can be over planning as well. So execution is just as important, right? Because
Yes.
if I spend too much time planning, I'll never execute, so I won't get anything done. If I don't spend enough time planning, then I won't be able to see the obstacles. My project won't run the right way. So there is a good balance. But if I'm, building my brand on LinkedIn, or, I'm looking for clients and things like this, I can't go and just make a couple posts and say this. I mean, if you look at really good content creators, they have spent hours planning on one post, right? and how do I do this? And maybe I go through, or how do I use the functionality of scheduling the posts so it hits my people, or what kind of things do I have to do in order to make sure I'm hitting the algorithm for my audience, right? That's all project experience, and you might be running it solo. You might be reaching out to, as I said, like market me more, right? That you're going to look at those types of things and say, okay, I don't have the expertise here, so where do I need to bring in a partner? So, but you have to have that strategy first so that you can then plan the project. And you say, okay, what are the 5 work packages that I have to do in order to do, advertising myself so I can get more clients to sell whatever, right? It's still project management within that, because you have to have those steps. But then if you plan your work, you work your plan, then, things go that way. And then you say, okay, where did I get to? Let me take that information. So I'm running this again. I have the feedback necessary in order to make improvements the next time, right? So it's the same thought process to project management.
So, given that you've seen obviously success here on LinkedIn
Sure.
and you have a full-time job, which means
Right.
you don't really have the time to spend 2 and 3 hours during the
Right.
workday on your LinkedIn. I'm sure you have a family at home, so you've got to be cognitive of family time as well. How do you navigate? And when you think of in terms of project management, how do you navigate the demands of your professional career and you know adapting strategies around LinkedIn?
Yeah, I mean, part of that, and my goal is thought leadership, right? So I'm not, me myself, I'm not selling anything at this point. Eventually, maybe later in my career, I want to, do something. So the goal is just to keep your name out there, but you have to keep it in front of you, right? And the goal is that I need to create content. It's really easy for me to do, because then maybe I'll take something from my personal life that spurs an idea. I'm in quality. Hey, let me write about this, um, and do those types of things. But it's really keeping it as a priority within your life, right? Um, and I'm a LinkedIn top voice. It was not something I tried to do. They came to me, but it's those types of things that you just want to continue to create content, because eventually maybe I'll use this platform to sell a book, right? Or maybe I'll do this to do consulting 10 years down the road. But if I build that network and I keep that in mind and say, hey, what are my long-term goals? That's helpful as well, right? So, but it's keeping it in front of you. It's knowing, as I said, it's that strategy, right? And part of this is who I am. My kids know, my wife knows, my employer knows. So those types of things, and you can use it towards your advantage, right? If you get people involved, that you're working with, even the CEO of our division reads my stuff because he's walked past the hall and quoted my posts that I've made. So you don't know who's watching too, right? You don't know what can spur. You just have to do what you can do, and then that stuff will come through. But you just got to know that it's like sales, right? It's the law of large numbers. If I do it enough, I can refine my technique. I can do it less, but then it's still putting that out there. I think is
Yeah,
that
I
important thing,
couldn't
keeping
agree
that in front
more.
of you.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, I think if I think about our episode today, I really feel like we've gotten a lot of golden nuggets. I kind of want to summarize kind of what we've learned today. One is that LinkedIn, as we know it, the effort that it takes, the amount of engagement that is needed, really to elevate your game, you really do have to consider LinkedIn as a project. You've got to put a strategy together, and then you've got to execute on that strategy, and you've got to be able to adapt to, some of the dynamic changes that are going to occur based on how good your messaging gets, or what you realize resonates, right? Or what drives individuals. And you have to be able to, as well, in any project, be able to understand who your audience is when you're having to present to them. You've got to be able to build a relationship with those on your team, and think of LinkedIn as your audience members, as your team, right? They are the ones who are coming to hear your content every day. And so you've got to be able to make sure that you are putting out content that drives them, that helps them, be successful, get to their end game, right? Or their end goals, helps them be more successful, helps them learn. I think as well, I think my biggest takeaway from this is, if I think about some of the challenges that we have in the world today, whether it's the wars that are happening, whether it's the conflict within our own government, within the people of the US, it's really because we have gotten away from understanding who we're speaking to, understanding who's on our team, because we haven't gotten to know them from a personal perspective. And
Yep.
I think that's super important to take a step back and really understand who you're engaging with and why, what's driving them, what's driving you, and being honest with yourself and what drives you, right? And building thick skin and realizing that, the thick skin doesn't mean that it's, ready to take abuse, but it's thick skin and really understanding where they're coming from as well, right? So that you can engage with them in a way that differentiates you from someone else, another leader, another project manager. Okay, well, I think that was a lot. So I appreciate all the tips. If you thinking about, so that was my summary, but you thinking about what we've talked about, if there was one thing that you wanted to leave everyone with, what do you think that would be?
So one of my favorite books is 7 Daily Habits of Highly Effective People.
Yeah.
And you could sum that up as seek first to understand, then to be understood, right? And I think that takes you a long way. So I would say if you keep that in mind and you practice that, then what we talked about today will really come through within, your professionalism.
I love that. Okay, great. So I think we got a lot of great tips for those of you that were out in the audience that wanted to ask some additional questions. Be sure to do that. We'll come back and answer them. If there are any of you who are on Team Replay, be sure to leave us the hashtag Team Replay and also ask any questions. Robert had a wealth of knowledge that he just really shared with us. So feel free to reach out to him directly. Robert, how do they actually do that?
Through LinkedIn is perfectly fine. As I said, I don't have, there's no, ownership business at this point. So please feel free, personal chat, things like that, comment on my posts, those types of things. I just like the engagement. So.
Awesome. Well, you heard it. You can go find him here anywhere on LinkedIn. You'll find him. I want to thank you, Robert, for being here. I also want to thank our sponsors. All things related to marketing is Market Me More, all sales related conversations with Cellivators. And again, anyone looking for impact, wanting to make impact, Top Voices Unite. I want to thank as well those that were out in the audience. I know there are a lot of people who just don't comment that are out there, but specifically Melanie and Gino, thank you for being out there and engaging with us. I want to thank all of you, whether you're Team Live or hashtag Team Replay. I want to thank you all for coming back, not just weekly, but more specifically even here today, but also weekly. We're here Wednesdays, 10 a.m. Central, 11 a.m. Eastern. Lots of times we have great guests like Robert, and then lots of times you're just stuck with me. So I think next week is just a me. So stay tuned for that topic. But Robert, I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart. It is a week of gratitude, right? We are in the week of Thanksgiving. So I am grateful that you were here today. I am grateful that we got to talk about project management, and I appreciate you just in general. So thank you, Robert.
Thank you, Denise. I appreciate you as well.
Awesome. I want to wish everyone a wonderful or a happy hump day and a wonderful Thanksgiving. Enjoy your time with your family, friends, or just even simply time off on the one day on Thursday. See you guys back here next week. Thanks, everyone. Robert, you can stay after for a second if you don't mind.
All right.
Thanks, everyone.
You. Bye.
Awesome.